Hello everyone, my name is Clay and welcome to Terminally Nerdy's Indie Impressions, where I take a look at independent and non-AAA titles, giving you my quick first impressions after at least 2 hours of gaming. Because if it's good enough for Steam refunds, well then it's good enough for me. And today I'm going to be looking at the FPS Roguelike known as Void Bastards. Now, I actually played this using the Xbox Game Pass for PC. I picked that up when they first announced it, and I'm already loving it, and I'm really looking forward to more games on it. So if you're on PC, and you're like me where you don't really replay games too awful often, that might actually be not a bad idea. There you go. So, Void Bastards is a game where you're crossing a roguelike like FTL, where you're on like a universe map and you're moving node to node, and then you go into ships to basically hunt down resources that allow you to build new items, new equipment, and thus progress forward. Story in this game is very light. There are a series of objectives that you get. Stuff like building a new ID card, and then building an HR computer, and all these different things as you're trying to escape this nebula. Now the thing is that you aren't really you, so much as you're a series of prisoners. The basic premise of the game is that there's this prison ship that is carrying dehydrated prisoners to, I guess, work release kind of thing, or like indentured servitude, and it gets lost in this infamous nebula full of like derelict ships, and the ship's computer, because it wants to get out, starts rehydrating prisoners one at a time and then sending them off on these missions to collect resources to build. So the game basically plays out in the sense of you're on this kind of nebula map and you move from the left side to the right side. You can never go backwards, and then you can go up and down. And the further down you go, the more difficult it gets. You start going into like Nebula Depth 2, Nebula Depth 3. Difficulty is seemingly connected to the depth that you're on. Along the way you can run into derelict ships, which are what you enter and collect resources from. You can then also run into event nodes, stuff like mutations, negative things like these mines and stuff. And you can always see ahead of you. You actually can't scroll the map at all, so that's kind of annoying. You only ever see what is visible on screen, and that's all you'll ever see. But you can very clearly see what each ship has. Like, you can click on a ship, and it won't immediately move you. You can just see, okay, well, that ship has these kind of enemies, these kind of modifiers, and I can find like food and fuel and different resource types on there, any special items that are required for your upgrades. You'll also be using an upgrade system where you go in and you build weapons. You build, basically you build weapons, tools, and like secondary weapons, as well as some basic upgrades, things like more oxygen, different kinds of movement buffs and things. Build them in your workshop. The upgrades, there's a fair amount of them, but there's a limited number of weapons. And when you go on a mission, you can only take one gun, one secondary, and one tool, basically. And that kind of limits you at times. In fact, most of the difficulty from this game is going to be the ammo and items, because those are scarce, and you can't replenish them in your actual like ship. When your character dies, the next character will get a selection of ammunition, food, and fuel based on what you have unlocked. But once you have that character, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. So if you run out of bullets for your handgun, unless you find more bullets on a ship, you will never have bullets for your handgun. And early on, this makes things very difficult, especially since, as far as I can tell, there's no melee attack. Now, when you go into a ship, you'll be going on a procedurally generated starship, which will have its own modifiers. Some ships will have no power, some will suffer brownouts, some will be full of smoke, which obscures vision, some will have fires going on, radiation, electrical problems. The layouts will be different, and the loot will always be different. Some ships have specific things, like if you find a cruise ship, it'll have a dining area, and that dining area will usually have a lot of food in it. If you find military ships, they might have a lot of ammunition in a section called the Tombs, which is like a barracks. If you find these pet ships, they tend to have a lot of cat mines, which are these weird little cat robots that you can send off and do stuff. So you can kind of tell what you're getting into based on the kind of ship it is and what rooms are available. Before you launch into a ship, you can actually see the map, and you can kind of plan out your route. While you're on a ship, your resources are basically your health, because you don't heal between missions, and your oxygen. Most ships have an atmosphere room, so if you're running low on oxygen, you run over to the atmo room, and you can refill your oxygen reserves. But that basically gives you a time limit per ship. You also have a system called merits that you pick up. Those are used to unlock certain doors or certain extra features. Like, you might find a security room, and that security room will let you deactivate any turrets on the ship. But you can only use the security room 3 times, and it's temporary unless you spend merits to permanently lock the ship's security off. There's almost every room that has a helm room, you can download a ship map, which will show you where all the treasure is. Or you can, with some merits, download that same map, but also enemy locations. So merits are kind of like your currency, your gold. When you die, you lose everything, but when your new character is created, you will keep access to all the things you've built in your workshop. So if you built the stapler, which is kind of like the shotgun, every future character is going to have access to the stapler and get some ammo for that stapler. When you build the, I guess it's a railgun, I forget the name of it, the Scorcher, I believe. When you build that, every future character will have access to that and some ammunition. So the more stuff you build between ship runs, basically, in your workshop, the more stuff your future characters are going to start with. Each character is also randomized, so you may get a character with a negative trait like smoking, where they'll cough and alert enemies, or you may get a character like I had, where he started with short, so he was like half height, which made the enemy harder for him to be hit, and he was a little faster, and then I got a mod that let him come with a randomized 4th item. So I got my primary gun, my secondary gun, my gadget, and then a random 4th item from any of those categories. I never knew what I was going to get for that 4th one. It wasn't one of the ones I picked, obviously. Something else. Visually, the game has a very nice aesthetic. I like it. I wish there was more variety. The ships start to feel the same. Because basically every cat ship, while its layout will be different, the stuff you find is the same. Every military ship, each ship type, the actual visual style of the ship stays the same. Enemies, there's not a lot of variety to them. In fact, they do some palette swaps later. So, like in Depth 1, you run into, say, these things called tourists, which are these little blobs that explode. And then I got to Depth 3, and I ran into a version of those that were yellow instead of blue, and when they died, they left radiation. But it was a palette swap. So there's not a lot of enemy variety, actually, to it. The sound effects and musics are kind of cool. Some of the enemies have voice clips. Some of those voice clips are kind of bizarre, and there's definitely a very dark and weird humor going on in this game. Like, the computer, every time you die, will say different things to you, voice-acted things with this, like, very thick British accent, and it's very, very silly at times. Overall, I enjoy Void Bastards. I'm not entirely certain it's worth, like, the $30 it goes for, to be perfectly honest. After playing it, I'm glad that I got it through Game Pass, because I played for about 3.5-4 hours, and I'm basically good. I don't want to keep playing. It's not like Dead Cells or anything like that, like those sort of roguelikes. It's a lot less interesting. Like in Dead Cells, each of my weapons had a randomized set of modifiers, but there was a lot more options and I had a lot more control. In this one, there's like 5 primary weapons, and that's it. I've unlocked 4 of the 5 of them in like 3.5 hours. There's like 5 or 6 secondary weapons and 5 or 6 gadgets. I've unlocked everything but like the last one in each category, and I'm only like 4 hours in. It's not the hardest thing to do for me, seemingly, and there's no difficulty slider that I remember picking either. So I do think if you have like Xbox Game Pass, or you can get it for maybe $15, it's probably worth about that to me. But at the full price, I don't think it's worth purchasing personally. If you like what you're seeing in the gameplay, feel free to pick it up, but that's what you're getting. The gameplay doesn't really change too much or any dramatic way. I do admit that as you get deeper, the ships start getting a little more varied. You start getting newer rooms, so keep that in mind. And there are eventually some things like space whales and space pirates that can kind of change things up. But by and large, what you see is what you're getting. So, as always, folks, if you like what I'm doing, feel free to hit that like button. If you don't like what I'm doing, feel free to hit the dislike button and let me know why. In fact, if you've played Void Bastards, leave a comment and let me know what you thought of it. And if you haven't, are you going to be trying it out? Feel free to support me on Patreon, patreon.com/terminallynerdy. It's how I do all of this, really. It's how I afford a lot of this stuff. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/terminallynerdy, and visit my website, terminallynerdy.com, to make sure you don't miss any of my writing or any of these videos, because they all get posted there. But again, thanks for watching, and remember, stay nerdy, everybody. See you next time.